But I used to write these letters about what I was doing, what I did at school, and then there'd always be, my mum would say, and you must say, and there'd be like a phrase. And only years later I realized it must have been a kind of a, not a code, you know, like there was some meaning. She'd say, you have to say, Mummy and Daddy are doing fine, you know, in spite of it all, or some phrase like that. Which, yes, so I realized much later in life, of course, that there was more than my little letter going on there. But I never then thought that I would meet Uncle Kathy in person. And of course, when I did, it was wonderful. He had such a good sense of humor, and he told me many stories about those days and the parties and the goings-on politically and in the social life of the comrades, because I think it's important to remember that he was a person who understood people, who loved people, and I think that is why he connected across generations with my generation, and of course more recently with younger people. And in fact, one of the last times I saw him was on the Fees Must Fall demonstration in Pretoria, where he emerged out of the tear gas, and there was a water cannon going by. And at that moment I saw Uncle Kathy walking with Shan, strolling along the pavement, chatting to the young students and people that were there. So of course I went to greet him. But what other leader would do that? What other leader of ours would have the courage of his own convictions to support the students and to speak with them, to try to understand their ways of struggle, what their demands were, and to support their demand for free education? When my dad died, of course it was many years ago, and Uncle Kathy was in Poolsmoor, he wrote a very lovely letter in which he described my father. He said he was my leader, my colleague, my father, my older brother, my guide, my mentor, my friend. And I think that those are words that now me and many, many of us here would apply to Uncle Kathy. So I want to say I think we really must learn and remember his example, because he wasn't just a leader, he was a man of principle, and I think that's where we have to take our cue. People earn leadership, earn respect from people, and unfortunately many of our current leaders have lost my respect and the respect of many, I think, of my and indeed older generations. And we can't shy away from this. We can't gloss over this and pretend this isn't going on. And I think one of the best ways we can remember Uncle Kathy is to think about him and how he stood out for what he believed in regardless, in the hardest of times, which were both then when he was in prison in the island in the early days, but also now. I think these were very, very hard times for him, to have struggled his whole life for an ideal and still see people he thought were comrades and friends making decisions and doing things that can only be described as against what he had stood for. And so I think that's why he could connect with other generations. It wasn't about age, it was about having that belief in principles, in values, being able to rethink and think again and think, what do we need to do now? Not resting on laurels, not accumulating stuff for himself. People have mentioned his humility and his lack of showing off and being aggrandizing about himself and the role he played. And I think that's something we must never forget, and particularly at this very moment, and not be afraid to call out those leaders who are not doing that, who are no longer our leaders. Hamburg Uncle Kathy.